Yo, what up? It's your boy, Mr. E, and today we're going to be learning about tables and rules. So, we're going to be diving into a new unit here all about equations, tables, and graphs. But I think a good place for us to start is by reviewing what tables and rules are. So, we're going to learn about how we can look at a table and determine what the rule is. Let's go ahead and get started. So, we have a table here at the bottom right, and it looks like we're looking for a rule. So step one is going to be make sure that the table is labeled correctly. Looks like we have a pretty good table here, but a couple of other names that we can have for x and y are these. This is called the x coordinate, and it's typically on the left on a table. It can be flipped around though. It's also called the input, the independent, and the horizontal. Those other names will come into handy as we learn more about graphing, but it is important to remember those things. One way that I remember it is that the x coordinate sounds kind of like an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend. And when you have an ex, you're independent and you need no mans. So that's how you'd label the x. Let's look at how we'd label the y. So we can call it the y coordinate, the output, the dependent, or the vertical. Again, those last couple of names will come more in handy when we learn more about graphs, but it is important to remember these things. So we have a really good table. It's nice and labeled, and we're ready to go. Step two, pick a rule that works from left to right. So we're looking at our table as we're going left to right, like we read. Sometimes we can notice patterns as we go up and down or right to left or other directions, but we really want to focus on left to right. So looking from left to right, maybe +1 will be our rule. So let's go with +1 for right now. Step three, make sure or see if it works for all numbers left to right. Well, 1 + 1 does give us 2, but 2 + 1 doesn't give us 4. So it looks like the rule that I came up with wasn't correct, but that's okay. We can always come up with a different rule. So step 4, if it does work, we'll write it down, but if it doesn't, try another rule. Remember, it must work for all. So that's the important thing about rules. Rules wouldn't be very fair if you could only use them for certain circumstances and not for all circumstances. So the same holds true in a table. If we make a rule, it has to apply to every single row. So another rule that I'm thinking of here is multiply by 2. So if we multiply by 2, 1 times 2 gives us 2, 2 times 2 gives us 4, 3 times 2 gives us 6, and 4 times 2 gives us 8. So looks like we have a good rule here, and we're going to call it multiply by 2. So when we're coming up with rules, remember the 4 different operations that we can have: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And remember, it must work for all. Let's go ahead and try a couple practice problems together. All right, it looks like we've got a couple tables here, and we're going to try to find the rules for these tables. So step 1 is to make sure it's labeled correctly. You know Mr. E's got these all labeled correctly. Do remember that the x can be called the input, the independent, or the horizontal axis, okay? The y can be called the output, the dependent, or the vertical axis. So now we're going to look at it from left to right and try to come up with a rule. So it looks like we start with 1 and we end with 6. Start with 2, end with 7. So kind of what I'm seeing here is that we're adding as we're going from left to right. And it looks like what we're doing is we're adding +5. So let's just double check that works for all of the rows. 1 + 5 gives us 6, 2 + 5 gives us 7, 3 + 5 gives us 8, 4 + 5 gives us 9, and 5 + 5 gives us 10. So it does work for all of them, so we have a good rule here. So again, going on to the next one, check to make sure it's labeled correctly. I'm going to say this over and over again, but it's really, really important. We've got the input, independent, and the horizontal. We can also call this side the output, the dependent, and the vertical. So, this one's not as friendly. It looks like the numbers are kind of all over the place. So we've got to find something that's going to work for all of them, okay? So, as I'm going from left to right here, I could subtract 2, but I could also divide by 2. So let's kind of keep that off to the side to remember that subtract 2 and divide by 2 is going to be working for us. And I still can't get used to making dots on this pencil. There we go. Okay, so we'll keep that off to the side and we'll see if it works for another one. 6 to 4, looks like we might be subtracting here Because 6 divided by 2 wouldn't give us 4. But again, we got to make sure it works for all. 2 minus 2 gives us 0. 5 minus 2 gives us 3. Looks like we've got a good rule here. So our rule is going to be subtract 2. Easy peasy. Now let's try one that maybe isn't as easy. We actually already have the rule now. Let's see if we can fill out the rest of our table. So it looks like we're multiplying by 3. So 2 times 3 would give us 6. 4 times 3 would give us 12. And 6 times 3 would give us 18. Now, something I notice here is that we have the y coordinates, or the y values, but we don't have the x values. So if going from left to right means I'm going to multiply, it would make sense that if I'm going to go from right to left, I'll do the opposite, or the inverse, which would be division. So instead of multiplying by 3, I'm going to divide by 3. So 24 divided by 3 would give us 8. 30 divided by 3 would give us 10. And we could always go back and double check. 8 times 3 gives us 24, and 10 times 3 gives us 30. So it looks like we have a good answer there. So all we've got to remember is thinking about these patterns as we're going from left to right and making sure that the rule applies to all. If it doesn't apply to all, it wouldn't be a very fair rule. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you get a couple times to practice with tables and rules so you can get a hundo on your next test. Keep learning, Elsbres.